Hello, welcome to Gearhead Obsession, and this is the history of Ferrari. Before we can talk about the history of the brand, let's first look at the company's founder, Enzo Ferrari. Enzo was born on February 18, 1898 near Modena, Italy. When he was 10 years old in 1908, Enzo's father took his brother and him to see an automobile race in Bologna, Italy. What he sees that day will chart the course that he will pursue for the rest of his life, building and racing sports cars. After a brief stint in the Italian army during World War I, Enzo gets a job with a small Italian automotive manufacturer, becoming their test driver. From here, Enzo gets into the world of motorsport, landing his first job as a race car driver. After successfully racing for smaller companies, he begins to race for Alfa Romeo. During his time as a racing driver for Alfa Romeo, he meets Countess Baracca. She is the mother of a World War I Italian flying ace. The Countess gives Enzo permission to paint her son's symbol, a prancing horse, on his race cars. Eventually adding a yellow shield for his hometown of Modena and the tricolore of Italy, the Ferrari emblem was born. 6 years later, in 1929, Enzo would become not only a racing driver but an entrepreneur. He forms his own racing team called Scuderia Ferrari. At this point, they raced Alfa Romeos with their own modifications to them. In 1931, Enzo quits driving his race cars to focus on running his team and company. His work paid off because by 1933, Scuderia Ferrari would become the official racing division of Alfa Romeo. Once you have owned your own company, it is hard to work for someone else, is the lesson that Enzo quickly learned during his time back at Alfa Romeo. He leaves Alfa Romeo in 1939 under the condition that he does not participate in racing under the Scuderia Ferrari name for 4 years. He forms Auto Avio Costruzioni in the old headquarters of Scuderia Ferrari. His new goal is simple: always beat Alfa Romeo. However, he had to put his plans on hold, for at this point World War II was in full force, and Enzo had to convert his factory to support the war effort. In 1943, he would move his factory from his hometown of Modena to Maranello. His factory was bombed twice by the Allies during the war and was rebuilt for the last time in 1946. Enzo's passion was for racing, however he realized that to make money to fund his racing, he would need to build road cars. When his factory was rebuilt for the final time, he added a section for road car production, and in 1947 came out with the Ferrari 125S, a car based off of one of Ferrari's Formula One cars, featuring a 1.5-liter V12 engine. When the war was over, there was a resurgence in automotive races, and Ferrari was at the forefront. Ferrari won the Mille Miglia in 1948, as well as the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1949. Ferrari also joined Formula One at its inception, and is the only team to have participated in Formula One every season in its history. In 1951, Ferrari would win its first Formula One Grand Prix and has gone on to win 225 Grand Prix in the team's history. In 1952, Ferrari would win its first of 16 World Championships at the hands of driver Alberto Ascari. As 1956 came around, tragedy hit the Ferrari family and brand. Enzo's son, Alfredo Dino Ferrari, passed away. He had been working on a new V6 engine for Ferrari. Future V6 engines would be named in his honor. The 1960s were a time of changes at Ferrari, as well as feuds between Enzo and others. The first was in the early 1960s, when a successful agricultural entrepreneur came to Maranello to tell Enzo some of the shortcomings of his 250 GT. He complained mainly about a few issues, including the clutch and how the clutch in his tractors was better. Enzo dismissed him, saying a tractor could never be as advanced or prestigious as a Ferrari. For his rude dismissal, the man became angry at Enzo and decided to make his own car company to beat Ferrari. The cars would bear his name, Lamborghini. Shortly after, Ferrari starts an institute in Maranello. It was dedicated to his son Dino and trains workers for Ferrari to this day. Ferrari started to get short on cash again in the late 1960s as he had in the 1940s. Companies started to enter negotiation with Enzo to buy a stake in Ferrari. Ford was one of these companies. After getting fairly far along in the negotiations, Enzo backed out after learning that Ford would not allow him to stay the leader of his racing team. The current head of Ford, Henry Ford II, was furious. He contacted Carroll Shelby and they developed the Ford GT40 race car for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Their goal was to beat Ferrari at the 24 Hours as payback for backing out of negotiations. After a few years, they do go on to beat Ferrari multiple times at Le Mans. After a few years, in 1969, Fiat would take a 50% stake in the company, with Fiat allowing Enzo to stay at the head of his racing team. This was a relief as Enzo now had much more money to work with when building his cars. In 1969, the iconic Ferrari Dino 246 GT, named for Enzo's son, hit showrooms around the world. Recent successes as well as access to deeper pockets, Ferrari built his own test track called the Fiorano Circuit, which opened on the 8th of April 1972. Later in the decade, Ferrari developed the Berlinetta Boxer engine, a flat 12 that would power the 365 GT/4, as well as become the original in a family of engines that would power a series of Ferraris for years to come. Following year, in 1977, Carrozzeria Scaglietti de Modena, Ferrari's design house, officially becomes part of the company. Perhaps the most important event of the 1970s for Ferrari was the beginning of a shift from a racing team that builds road cars on the side to a full-fledged sports and supercar builder with one of the world's best racing teams. There were no Fiat, Ford, or General Motors in terms of production numbers. However, their yearly production numbers were creeping into the thousands as opposed to a few hundreds not long before. Ferrari's fame and prestige only grew in the 1980s. This was in large part due to the Ferrari Testarossa. This car was a continuation of the Berlinetta Boxer line that began with the 365 GT/4 back in the early 1970s. It was the first Ferrari poster car, which in 1984 featured a 5-liter flat 12 engine that was good for 380 horsepower in the States and 390 horsepower in Europe. The car hit 60 miles per hour in 5.8 seconds on its way to a top speed of 180 miles per hour. The Testarossa was the first Berlinetta Boxer to be sold in the United States, which is one of Ferrari's largest markets. This car's fame only increased as it was driven by Don Johnson in Miami Vice. Not long after the release of the Testarossa was the launch of two of the most famous Ferraris of all time, the 288 GTO and the F40. The 288 GTO was also released in 1984 as a road-legal Group B race car. It had a 2.8-liter twin-turbo V8 that made 400 horsepower and could propel the car to 60 miles an hour in approximately 5 seconds and had a top speed of 189 miles per hour. Soon after, the Ferrari F40 was released in 1987. This car was designed to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Ferrari. It was the peak of all Ferrari had to offer. It was powered by a 2.9-liter twin-turbo V8 that produced 471 horsepower, hitting 60 miles per hour in 3.8 seconds and a top speed of 201 miles per hour. Unfortunately, the success of this car was marked by tragedy as Enzo died months after the release at 90 years old. After his death, Fiat's stake in the company rose from 50 to 90%, with Enzo's son Piero retaining the remaining 10%. The 1990s brought new changes and successes for Ferrari as they adopted V8s to their lineup alongside the V12s. In Formula One, Michael Schumacher dominated at the wheel of a Ferrari, winning 7 championships in the 10 years between 1994 and 2004. Ferrari started off the 21st century with a bang, releasing the Ferrari Enzo in 2003. This car used Formula One derived technology and was powered by a 6-liter V12 engine that produced 650 horsepower. It flew to 60 miles per hour in 3.1 seconds and had a top speed of 217 miles per hour. Another innovative car for Ferrari in the 2000s was the Ferrari FF. While not the most beloved of Ferraris, it was the first Ferrari to be all-wheel drive. In 2014, Ferrari released the LaFerrari, the successor to the Enzo, and its predecessors the F50, F40, and 288 GTO. This car was revolutionary as it was the first production Ferrari to feature a hybrid powertrain. It featured a 6.3-liter V12 that produced 949 horsepower combined with its hybrid powertrain. This car could hit 60 miles per hour in 2.4 seconds and had a top speed of 217 miles per hour. In 2015, Ferrari became a publicly traded company after selling 10% in an IPO on the New York Stock Exchange. In the future, Ferrari will continue to create innovative, amazing supercars that are the height of prestige and status for many of the world's wealthiest people, as well as being the poster cars for automotive enthusiasts around the world. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it informative. Please feel to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'm just getting started out, and any constructive criticism would be greatly appreciated.